Hello, TPR Nation. This is Amber Kuhn from the Perfect RIA. Thank you for joining me on today's Wallet Friday, where I'll be covering the highlights and action items from this week's episodes. The value sledgehammers were out this week. On Monday, the guys were talking about a comment that they received recently, which was someone who was tired of hearing about delivering value to clients. So the guys wanted to dig into this. Matt said that certain terminology can help frame a discussion, but that means nothing to a prospect or a client. Those are things used to frame things, but you have to do something that your client or prospect can't get elsewhere. So with talking about delivering value to clients, that's really an internal thing, and there's a different conversation when you're talking about value with a client. For example, the guys are never calling their clients and asking them to come in for surge meetings. That's an internal phrase and not how you'd share it with a client. Micah said that even if clients are hearing the jargon in the industry, he still wants to be really clear about what that means to them and communicate specific actionable advice. The guys talked about this in terms of explaining value to a client. For example, if your client thinks the value they're receiving is worth more than the fee, then they can continue to work together because that's value in the eye of the beholder, and it's the client's perception of value. They said this ties to wanting their prospects and clients to make an educated and informed decision, and they see advisors going wrong and saying, hey, hire us because we deliver value. Micah said they want clients to see the value that they do in planning and the quarterly value adds. And the clients like to know that the guys are in their corner. This is where they see value. This is why they're happy to pay the fee, because they're there for their client, not just because they do a great job in money management. They said it has to be something in addition to that. Matt said where the value really comes as an advisor is helping the client understand something that no one else has helped them understand. So the guys talked about what is value and what isn't. Micah said that you need to come into anything with a massive value sledgehammer. You should be able to go in, deliver so much value in a meeting that it doesn't matter whether you get hired or not. That should be your primary goal. Matt mentioned something recently, which is that you don't want to confuse value with volume. So having 47 action items isn't value. It's noise, but this is something that you have to practice. So the guys then got into defining value. They said it has to be individualized to a client. Now, this doesn't mean unique to where you're doing a different value add for every client, but for the value that you're delivering. And it has to provide a client with direct action items that they can take action on. And you need to think about how you can make your clients' lives easier. For example, telling a client to review their estate planning documents versus telling them that they're missing their beneficiaries. Micah said, don't get overwhelmed by this because it can be refined. But they said if you're not doing any of these things, then it's easy to add value, and you can start that by doing value adds. And these are the things that will separate you from the average advisor. The guys wrapped up by saying that value adds are simple. They aren't complicated, but it takes a lot of work to figure out. So, if you aren't doing them, you can speed up that process by finding people who are doing them. Let's get into action items. Visit theperfectria.com/quiz to help identify your pain points that are preventing you from achieving success. Look at your fall surge and imagine that you couldn't talk about investment statements or accounts or performance. Think about what you would do for value instead. And then text RIA to 55123 to get information from Belay on working with assistants. On Wednesday, Matt was joined by Chris Stanley from Beach Street Legal to talk about the work that he does and things to think about with compliance, common myths, and mistakes. Beach Street Legal is a law firm and compliance consultancy that focuses exclusively on RIAs. And their core practice areas involve day-to-day compliance, corporate legal work, and also M&As. Chris said the common misconception or the common fears are being paralyzed by not knowing where to start with compliance and not applying a systems approach to compliance. He said organization is your friend. So he said think about where are your files, how are they tied together, and how are your workflows connected. He said it's a books and records test. So step 1 is to look at the record keeping rule, and if you're registered, run through and make sure you're keeping all the records. And are there any gaps? Because that's what a regulator will ask you to produce. So if you're not keeping those records, you're not starting off on the right foot. And step 2 is, are the records organized and accessible and complete? Chris shared where people tend to miss things. He said it's based on your compliance manual because advisors may do what they say they're doing, but they don't have the documentation to support it. And if that's the case, then it never happened. So advisors need to show their work. Chris also recommended that you test yourself and pull documentation to make sure you're doing what you say you're doing and make sure you're not taking your processes for granted. Chris also said that you don't want to overcommit in your compliance policies and procedures, and don't make your life more complicated than it needs to be from a regulatory perspective. He encourages advisors to solve little problems earlier. He said it'll be easier to fix that early than later on when you've already compounded a problem. And the earlier that you can get your organizational foundation underneath you, the better off you'll be for the long term. So Matt asked, at what point should someone reach out to a compliance attorney, especially for those that are in the BD world and thinking about leaving? And Chris said that whether you work with an attorney or compliance professional or some type of combination, he said the sooner the better because they can help set the stage and hopefully help avoid mistakes that might make it difficult to fix further down the line. Chris and Matt talked about how compliance feels like this big, scary thing, but it's really not as scary as people think. Chris said that if you're doing the core functions, then you're 90% of the way there. He said that if you can be very transparent and involve compliance early in the process, you're likely to get a more dynamic response and a willingness to find a solution and collaboration. He said no question is too small or too immaterial. Let's get into action items. The core documents from a compliance perspective are your Form ADV, your compliance manual, your client agreement, and if it's a separate document, your code of ethics. And make sure that they all say the same thing and they're not contradictory. And think about, are there little incremental steps that you can take to either be more organized or more efficient? And then you can reach out to Chris by visiting beachstreetlegal.com, or you can email them at team@beachstreetlegal.com. On Thursday, Jamie talked about the art of practicing and your role in others' lives. She said practicing is one of the most important disciplines that you need to do no matter what your role is. You need to be an expert in understanding the importance of practicing and teaching others the value of practicing. She said perfect practice makes perfect, so you need to treat every scenario as game day. She said learning to practice and becoming the person you were meant to be is critical every day. She said time is the greatest equalizer. And people may not have the same background, but they do get the same amount of time, and you have to choose what you're going to prioritize. Jamie shared how her entire family works with a younger generation to help them so that they start early practicing to be the people they're going to become. She stresses they need to be kind, honest, and hardworking. Everyone should be pitching in and everyone should be helping. So this starts from the time that they're little. For example, learning to shake hands when they're 3 and dressing appropriately in public. And Jamie acknowledged that this is forced at a young age, but she said she's teaching her niece how to hold a fork and get dressed, so why not manners as well? She said their goal as a family is to educate and teach the next generation to be leaders and to be influential in whatever space they choose. So that means they need to be leaders in their household, in their community, and in their friend group. And they have to have a sense of self-respect and dignity to lead difficult conversations and practice for who they're going to become in the future. She said there's so many daily negotiations that people have to make because anytime you're wanting another human to take action, you're negotiating that action. And you're hoping people are going to rise to the challenge. But you have to make sure that you're moving things forward and doing things in a way that creates a good culture for your business. Jamie talked about how young adults need to be able to lean on someone to give them influential advice and steer them towards the right direction. Because young adults lack the ability to fully understand until they're about 25 years old because their brain is still developing. So you want to make sure that you give them a positive influence and realize that they're not going to have their life figured out. And you need to be more involved than you think you need to be, especially as kids grow into teenagers and young adults. That isn't the time to be more hands-off. Jamie said every single day of our life, we're practicing to become that next person and that next version of ourselves, and that everything we do counts. And that includes practicing your meetings and how you talk to clients and prospects and how you deliver things. She said to think about whether what you're doing today is serving the person that you want to become. That you have to keep realizing that every day matters because it either builds you up or it drains you. Think about what you're ingesting, what you're willing to give your time to, and your devotion, your passion, and your commitment, because tomorrow you have to wake up with the results of that. Let's get into action items. If you have young adults in your life, do the hard work and have the tough conversations. What are you practicing, and who is the person that you want to be in 5 years? And write that down. And then who are the 5 people you're spending the most time with? And look at whether they're serving the person you're wanting to become. That wraps up this week's recap. Thank you for joining me on today's Follow-Up Friday. Please share this or any of our episodes with another advisor or team member who you think might benefit from listening. And until next time, happy planning.